Good afternoon, everyone. Magandang hapon sa ating lahat. Welcome to another SEARCA Agriculture and Development Seminar Series, or ADSS. The ADSS encourages the presentation and discussions of development and research issues, as well as their implications for agricultural and rural development and natural resource management. For more than 20 years now, the ADSS has been facilitating a vibrant exchange of scientific and practical knowledge in agriculture and development within and even beyond the Los Baños science community. Thus, we encourage you to engage in the open forum after our speaker's presentation. My name is Stoix, and I'll be your MC for this afternoon. This is ADSS, from compliance to competitive advantage, transparency, digital product passports, and the future of responsible trade. Emerging technologies such as blockchain, digital product passports or DPP, and digital identity are reshaping international trade value chains. Our speaker's presentation will draw lessons from several organizations that demonstrate how these tools function in practice for key stakeholders across the supply chain. A few house rules before we start. Please put your phone on silent mode and reserve your questions for the open forum. We are also being live streamed via SEARCA's Facebook page, and for any social media sharing, please use the hashtag SEARCAADSS. This seminar is also recorded and will be made available on SEARCA's YouTube channel. You may subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. Lastly, this event is co-organized with various units from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, namely the College of Human Ecology, the College of Economics and Management, Office of the Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Enterprise Management, the Business Affairs Office, and the Institute of Plant Breeding. To introduce our distinguished speaker for this afternoon's seminar, may I call Dr. Jennifer Marie Amparo, Dean of the College of Human Ecology of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Ma'am.
Thank you very much, Stoic. Isang makaekolohiyang pantaong hapon sa ating lahat. Good afternoon. On behalf of the organizing team, I'd like to recognize and thank SEARCA, of course, our dear partner for the ADSS seminar today. Of course, to Dr. Sombilia, to Dr. Nova Ramos. A round of applause for SEARCA, please, for hosting us this afternoon. I'd also like to recognize our dear partners from the College of course, Human Ecology, from the College of Economics and Management, College of Engineering and Agrotech. Yes, our SEAT students are here, all right, from SEAT, also from the Business Affairs Office, Office of the Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Enterprise Management. We have TTBDO, or the Techno Transfer and Business Development Office, as well as the Institute of Plant Breeding. So this morning, I think Dr. Robert Meeder, our dear speaker for this afternoon, already went to biotech and also saw IPB in terms of their work in their research as well. Okay, so it is my honor to present to you and introduce our honorable speaker today. So, but before that, I'll give you a quick context of this talk this afternoon. During a recent trip to Germany, I was struck by something simple yet powerful in a university canteen. Alongside the food choices, they displayed information on the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the different meals. Would you know your lunch, for example, in terms of your eco footprint? Okay, it was an excellent reminder that consumers can make more informed choices when sustainability information are made available or visible. But the experience also revealed something deeper. Responsible consumption is not simply about numbers. It is about how information, choices, behavior, and systems come together. The canteen had deliberately reduced the number of choices available, not to limit students, but to avoid overwhelming them. With fewer, healthier options, students were more likely to choose and consume healthier food. Okay? Even if I think most of us here are in a seafood diet. When we see food, we eat, right? All right. This brings us to an important question for responsible agricultural trade. How do we move from compliance, simply meeting sustainability requirements, to using responsibility as a source of competitive advantage? As markets increasingly demand traceability, transparency, climate accountability, and social responsibility, compliance can become more than an obligation. It can become a pathway to trust, market access, innovation, and stronger value chain. Today, we are privileged to hear from Dr. Robert Meeder, an international researcher, strategist, and practitioner working at the intersection of social enterprise, circular economy, digital innovation, and cultural heritage. His work focuses on strengthening community-based value chains by connecting traditional knowledge with emerging technologies, including blockchains, digital product passports, and digital identity systems. Through initiatives across Sri Lanka, the USA, Mexico, India, Armenia, and Europe, Robert collaborates with government, industry, and artisan communities to develop regenerative economies or economic models that improve transparency, market access, and resilience. His research explores how social enterprises can become catalysts for climate action by integrating culture, technology, and inclusive economic development into sustainable system. His talk this afternoon invites us to think beyond how do we comply towards the more strategic question: how can responsible practices create value and competitive advantage, particularly for our farmers, agricultural enterprises, communities, and institutions engaged in the future of responsible trade? We look forward to an insightful conversation on how sustainability, technology, and inclusive development can transform compliance from a requirement to an opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce to you Dr. Robert Meeder.
Thank you very much. And excuse my voice, I started losing it the last few days, so I'll do my best. Can we click? Is it here? Okay, so thank you very much for a great introduction. I couldn't have said it better myself, so we might as well just pack up. But I don't consider myself anything special. I just guess I see things around me, and I see the interconnectivity between what we do. I wouldn't say my path has been very traditional either. And before I go on, of course, I should formally thank everyone in the room. I'm not the best to remember everyone. SEARCA, of course, UP, of course, Dean, Jenny, thank you for inviting me. This is part of a bigger discussion, and hopefully I too can put Philippines on the map of a partner and a country that I work with. I also want this to be a little more interactive, because I think that's where you gain the most from me. So I'll present my presentation, but please feel free to ask questions. This morning, I went to have a coffee and I saw this mug. Where is this from? Starbucks. And I sat there and I was with our dear friend Byron, who took me to Starbucks, and I just thought, isn't this funny? Like, handcrafted. What of this for me or for you? What is this? Like, what is handcrafted in this? Yet the irony, this is supposed to give us value, because we know that Red made it. And so for some reason, I as a consumer is meant to feel closer to Red because he made this, and more so Starbucks. But the reality is there's a lot more to this coffee than this coffee, and everyone in this room knows this, right? There's a whole other value chain and supply chain in this storytelling, but we don't see that. So I guess my greatest fear right now is that if we don't seize this opportunity of technology and transparency, we're going to see a lot more than that. And my worry is we're going to shift from compliant, well, we're going to shift from the value of transparency to compliance, where it just becomes a marketing gimmick. So as I mentioned, if it clicks, oh, no, back, sorry. As I mentioned, my work, my research really is intersectional between technology, craft, community. My background, I've studied business, I've studied design. So maybe what I say to you today isn't so fascinating, but I see it from coming downstream to coming upstream. And the work that you do and a lot of your research is actually very important to this dialogue that we need to have. We can no longer stop at saying, I'm a designer and I don't need to care about where my fibers or materials come from. It's so important, really has to be part of this discussion and discourse that I too, as a designer, have to take responsibility, and you have to know about where your innovation is going through the value chain. And part of the biggest problem is that it's a broken chain. So this is where we can really use technology to hopefully show the full value of what it is that we do. I've had the pleasure to work in luxury. I've worked in fashion. I've worked for big fashion brands, Gucci, Armani, Bottega Veneta. I switched. I worked in fair trade. I've also worked in policy. I work quite closely to European Union Ministry of Foreign Affairs, advising them on how we can invest and support communities through cultural and craft or cultural diplomacy. But the interesting thing here was, I guess, the pivot in my life really happened when I worked for luxury, and I worked for a very big fashion brand, and I was responsible for their PR and marketing. And I fell in love with this brand because they spoke so much about craftsmanship and their products being handmade and the power of craft. And there was two things that happened. The first was every year, the company headquarters in Milan would cut a huge check for $1 million and give it to UNICEF. And we would have to celebrate this huge CSR activity. And I was like, but that doesn't make sense, because why would you give $1 million to a charity, though very honorable, when you could invest that $1 million within your own value chain system? And not that long after, there was a very huge negative press announcement that came out that this same brand was subcontracting Chinese tourists to make their products in Italy, and they still would use the word made in Italy. So for me, it was a huge shock. I was like, we are promoting this handcrafted values, and we're promoting this made in Italy and social sustainability, but we're far from being anything about social or responsible. So what was it that I needed to do? And this is where my passion really for true craft came in. And one of the true original crafts are indigenous craftsmanship, or people of the land that crafts and products are made. So if I could, oh, sorry, did I go too fast? Okay, so one thing that I want to kind of address, and I find sometimes this whole discussion of, you know, sustainability as like a moving goalpost. I remember a day when organic was sustainable, you know, to say that you had organic textiles, that was a big thing in your designs, and somehow organic transferred to, you know, sustainability and principles. And now we're talking a lot about circularity. And I think circularity is a little bit closer to what we should be doing, but still, I worry that if we're not really ensuring that circularity begins from the earth, ends in the consumer, but goes back to the earth, and we're not really discussing circularity. We were discussing really small little systems within systems, but the reality is we have to really think about a big picture. And this is where I think it's so important, this discourse and sharing is important. Of course, in this process, we lose a lot of the knowledge of what's been there already before us. We tend to think that we have to reinvent systems when actually really good systems exist before us. And I go back to this question, what if circularity started with people, waste, culture, identity, but all at the same time, rather than at one starting point? And we really have to change our mindset from volume to a value business. Now, granted, a lot of societies and economies have been built on capacity and volume. We really need to start looking at solutions that are more micro and impactful. We talk about people, planet, profit, and I also like to challenge you on culture. We can say that people has everything to do about their social well-being, their right to work, but culture is really the thing that binds us all together. So maybe if we start approaching the work that we do through this cultural lens, we can really create a long-lasting difference. At the same time, this is the opportunity of tech and how we can implement tech that's both, thank you, that's both equitable, fair, and transparent. I'm not sure if many of you have been aware, but in Europe right now, there's a lot of legislation that's being passed under the Green Deal. So in principle, it's a great idea, but in practice, it means that a lot of communities and economies are going to suffer immensely. Now, this may have been a response to our carbon and our footprint and trying to do the right thing. But in doing this, we also threaten and we affect a lot greater of the community, and we're forcing a lot of communities to adapt to our way. Sometimes I worry if this level of legislation is almost like colonizing communities to change, to become closer to what we expect of them versus allowing us to have a dialogue of cooperation. The DPP stands for the Digital Product Passport. By 2030, all products in Europe need to have an identity that you can scan your product and you can see precisely who made it, the materiality, and post-consumer breakdown. Now that's great if you're a big company and you have all the legal team and advocacy, but what if you're a small craft maker from the Philippines trying to export some baskets or some products into EU under fair trade? You can't even call yourself fair trade anymore. The mechanisms won't even exist. Last week, the EU also introduced a new packaging legislation that required you as a Filipino small craft maker or producer that you have to take responsibility for how your packaging will be broken down and taken care of in Europe. And if you didn't, you'd have to pay for it. So imagine if you had 10 different countries in Europe that you're selling products to. That's 10 different countries that you'll actually have to pay a fine or a penalty for absorbing your waste. Now, once again, in principle, great idea, but in practice, not the fairest for the SME sector and the micro sector trying to get into the European market. So let's see if I do that. Okay, so this is the starting point of an even greater shift for me, let's say, when I was in Sri Lanka and I was CEO of a design school there. This is at the time of COVID, and I'm sure these pictures look somewhat familiar to you as well. They're not that foreign. Long queues, shortage of fuel, food problems, and at the same time, a lack of land management, where a lot of the export crops, I used the banana crop, were being burnt post farming practice. And what frustrated me about this picture was the bananas were being exported to Europe. And so as a European consumer, imagine the student at the German university could see that banana's carbon emission really came from the transport from from Sri Lanka to Germany, but never really considered post-agricultural carbon emission. And that's what that is. So what happens post-farming is that carbon count is on Sri Lanka, not on the consumer. And that frustrates me because we try to talk a big talk in Europe, but the reality is we don't realize the full impact that we're having. At the same time, as I mentioned, my passion for craft was really around an indigenous knowledge. And in Sri Lanka, it's about hand weaving and handloom that existed in Sri Lanka for 2,500 years. So it was really core to their DNA. And yet, once again, a very close friend of mine gave me a call, and she's, the family business is one of the largest handloom manufacturers in the country. They employ about 600 hand weavers. And she says to me, Robert, I have a major problem. If I do not find work for my weavers, they will all go to the Middle East as domestic slaves, workers. And what happens is They leave their families, they leave their communities, and for a fact we know that their families fall apart in these rural areas. And so what do we have? We have a broken family, we have money being sent back, we have children who don't go to school, we have higher rates of alcoholism, drug abuse, sexual abuse, and we have a generation of children that don't get educated. So in principle, we risked actually destroying these 100-odd families that would suffer this. So I knew something had to get done. And in the same discussion, I realized with a level of research that within the banana stem itself was actually a really interesting fiber, which is a very low-tech operations of extracting, but at the same time could provide a solution that we were facing in terms of cotton shortage. So we looked to combine this low-tech solution of bringing it together, where just by placing banana fiber in the web, and those that don't know about textile design, you always have a warp and a web, a horizontal and a vertical, right? And we could see that by putting banana fiber on the web, and this had to be done by hand because the banana fiber was quite coarse, we could already produce a textile product that was 70% less dependent on cotton. So we had something. Click. Great. And this is what we call the agri-waste banana textiles. So from this journey, we were able to curate a collection of alternatively woven textiles that employ traditional hand looming to give women the work with fibers that existed within their ecosystem. So we too had to become less dependent on auxiliaries or textiles that were imported to become more independent on what was readily available. And we've seen it in the food industry. So I was always challenged to think, why don't we see it in textiles? At the same time, this relationship reminds me a little bit, and I spoke about this earlier, that traditionally, the man who tended the land was actually married to the woman who made the product. It was his wife. So there was always a symbiotic relationship between the maker and the farmer. Yet somehow through evolution and development and capitalism, those separations separated. And so the maker has forgotten the value of the farmer, and the farmer doesn't realize his impact on the maker. So this is where I think us being here today is kind of a reawakening of what this relationship could be. Now, having created this textiles, we realized that this was the opportunity that we could add a level of technology. And this was really at the time, I think it was around 2020, when blockchain was really being spoken about as a solution to show transparency. This was also at a time where people were confusing blockchain with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So there was also a lot of uncertainty and misinformation about what blockchain was. For those of you that don't know what blockchain, it's essentially a digital ledger of each step of the value chain or the supply chain. So if you think of the old accounting ledger books of every step along the way, it's that, but digitalized. Granted, there are some fantastic benefits of blockchain, such as an inability to change data. So once the data is locked in, you cannot change it. So if I make a purchase from you, and that purchase is being listed on the blockchain, that transaction can never be erased. So you cannot turn around and say, you never sold me the fiber, for example. At the same time, my step to you, if it involved transportation, I could capture those data points and information. So at the end of the day, it's a way to really organize all your data points in a sequence of steps, but then be able to transform the data to read it in multiple different ways to really tell the story that you want to tell. So this is where we developed this bag together with a Danish designer. We called it the banana bag. The blockchain was an RFID tag. It's set about here. And this was, we were the first actually handloom manufacturer in the world to integrate blockchain technology with a handloom product as such. And this was presented at Dutch Design Week. So we were very honored to take it that far. And it's really this culmination of low-tech, high-tech. Great. So this is what the backend, or this is what the interface looked like. So you as a consumer could scan the product, you would see it here, and you would have three options: the product journey, the impact, and you could add it to the wardrobe. Now, we developed this technology. Unfortunately, I learned many lessons because I'm not a techie along the way. We didn't sign any IP or agreements with our tech partner. So everything we developed with them actually remained with them. So let me explain. The product journey was really to introduce every single incremental step along the way. So you have fabric information, you have transport impact, you have transport to the next point, you have garment production, transport, and packaging, and so forth. From there, you could pick, for example, weaving as one of the steps. And there, within weaving, you could actually see the water and the carbon emission and its equivalent. We thought this was brilliant. We took it one step further. We could actually, and this was, sorry, so this is the interface. So you have a consumer side, you have a cloud backend, you have, and the worker side. So everyone has their own interface on the app. So at any one point, depending on your role and designation, so if you're stitching, you would have to scan every time you were dealing with a product, or if you're transporting, you would have to scan the boxes when you put it on your truck. And of course, the consumer side could engage with the product. I will add here, there was this even bigger vision to have a wardrobe. So eventually, if you scanned all your products, you could actually start realizing how many products were in your wardrobe and then actually calculate the full carbon impact of your consumer choices. But the real radical idea is, oh no, forward, was this one, was the worker transparency. So we could scan at any one point and actually see the people involved in that step, the labor impact. So I could go even further. I could click on the weaver. Can you hear me if I stand here? Yes. So I could click on the weaver and I could see a few things. One, I could see that she was female, so we addressed diversity. So I could also then later segment all my data to see what is the actual distribution, male, female, which is very important. I could also see her age, that she was above 18. Now this was third-party verified, so we could ensure that if we were ever audited, that we actually had the data to show that there were no children involved in the process or the factory. And finally, I could see her contract type. So once again, thank you, great. That she had a contract. Because a lot of the times in the craft sector, workers are not permanent workers, they're day workers. So this would also allow me to show that my staff, had solid contracts, who they were, and they know their age. Now, the most radical thing that we tried to do was actually show wage transparency. So you could see that we made a transaction of salary transfer to the bank. The bank would act as a third-party verifier to say that it was paid, and the worker themselves would confirm that they received the salary. So it was a three-step verification process. The International Labor, ILO, International Labor Organization, was very interested in this solution and they wanted to work with us. However, when I was here, it was a very good project, but when we tested it with consumers, actually people didn't get it. And I'll go back here. First, and this is, I'm being very honest, so I want you also to be able to learn from our learnings. This was a huge issue because, as Dean Jenny spoke about in terms of the carbon emission, when we showed people the amount of water that went into this bag or the amount of carbon, the first question we got asked by people was, should I drink less water tomorrow if I knew this was the level of water that went into it? Then, when it came to salary, the second question was, how much did they get paid? And then when we entered the discussion of a fair salary or of a living salary, their heads exploded. And they were like, well, how come these people in Sri Lanka only get $200 a month? And even though that was a living wage, to try and explain to them the disparity between a Western salary and someone from the global South was too much. So what we realized in this experiment was you really have to pick your data, and you really have to understand why you're using this data and the impact that the data you have to the purpose that you want. And in this particular proof of concept or case study, we were somewhat blind, and we thought we wanted to show consumers that this bag actually really gave greater impact than a regular bag. The bag is available if you want to buy it, actually. And the technology exists, but we ended up moving away from this technical partner because they also weren't willing to collaborate further with us. Can I click? But from that case study, we managed to engage with the top universities of the world, and we took this solution to the University of Arts London, which is a part of Central St. Martin's. And it was really funny because we ran workshops with students who had never actually seen yet understood what was handloom. I even had a student ask, what's the difference of regular material and handloom? And to explain to her that handloom textiles was handmade, for me, was an embarrassment to the institution. Why? Because they just bought their textiles from a fabric shop. They didn't realize that that piece of textiles came from hundreds of hours and hands and people that were behind it. So through this partnership that we actually created a course with the University of Arts, educating students on transparency and using these sorts of tech solutions to measure their impact in creation. So another point I wanted to address, and this is kind of a learning, was this. We know what this is, right? This is a nutritional guide, right, Dean Jenny? What does this actually tell me? It tells me the amount of fats. I know I shouldn't consume too many because of my calorie count. I should only have 2,000. Now, we get this, but how many people in the room's grandmother, let alone mother, understands this? And that's the problem we're facing with this level of data. I get it. I know what went into it. But the problem is we don't have this as a standard measure. And right now, the DPP compliance is just very superficial. They're not really going into the data to make consumers make a better choice, to understand what does it mean to have 5,558 glasses of water that goes into their product. So it's never in vain. So I think this is a lesson that we've got to keep on going. And I welcome all of you as engineering students to really start thinking about the information that you have access to when you're doing your projects and how that could actually be translated to consumers. So this was another project, and I welcome you to scan the QR code. Hopefully you can see it. Now what you see hopefully on your phones is a Lingon, it's called Lingon certification. Now this certification is as close as you're going to get to DPP. So this is going to be the European standard. And I invite you to take your time, look through the information, look through how the information is organized, because this is what's going to be required on every single product in Europe by 2030. Now how this came about was the country director of Armenia of Fair Trade had seen the project in Sri Lanka, and he invited me to come and visit them in Armenia. And a lot of the times in my work in innovation, people don't really understand what innovation means. And he was just like, come innovate with me. And so I went. And the first thing I saw, I always start with their product. And they were producing carpets, but they were using synthetic materials. They were using a polyester fiber textiles, polyester yarn from China. And that was my first starting point, where I was like, let's break this down and go back to source. Because the reality was, in Armenia, there was a long-standing history of wool. But the reality was the market forced them to produce cheaper products and to forget where they came from. And as in that process that actually really lost the ancient knowledge that wool had always existed in Armenia. And the more we researched, the more we realized that somewhere between 80 to 90% of the wool that comes from the export meat industry was being burned. And similarly, that carbon count wasn't being placed on the European consumers eating meat, lamb meat, I should say, from Armenia, but was being burnt there. So this is where I found that was an opportunity in waste. And somehow working with waste has been somewhat my specialty, because I really think there's a lot of potential in waste, because it's already a product that's been discarded and it's out of the system to put it back into the system. That's what I believe is circularity. Then this is the final tech project that I worked on. And actually, I didn't have any. I worked with Lingon. It wasn't my tech solution. I'm not a techie. But finally, I decided I need to become somewhat of a techie. And I joined forces and I created this new solution called We Are Legacy, which hopefully you can scan there. And it's based on this bag. And We Are Legacy, you can actually see the RFID tag here. So I invite you later to come see the bag. So We Are Legacy is really all about changing consumers' mindsets and habits through storytelling. So we realized through consumer testing, there was far greater impact in the storytelling and portraying stories than in any kind of impact measures that you see. And you can see on the app, we talk about the heritage and the process of what went into it. We talk about the community that gets that benefits from this production. We talk about materiality. We show certification. So it's an easier interface for consumers to appreciate and understand. So our dream is that if you had two products here, and this one had the data and the storytelling, and another one didn't, you would pay the price to take this product because you could see the story and you could trust the story. Unlike my Starbucks coffee that just said handmade, right? So that's the key point there. And of course, in the process of capturing this information, we're able to tell story, the knowledge, the identity, the provenance, and at the end of the day, create a greater value for a product that would normally be undervalued by most consumers because they don't have access to the information. And I'll add one more point for anyone who's like a PR marketing person in the room or who has that background. I genuinely believe that the storytelling process is the new marketing of the future. So being able to actually tell the true story of a product will be the marketing perspective that consumers will want to see because it's verified and it's transparent. So granted, we'll have products, we'll have, sexy models selling a bag, that's fine. But there's still a growing consumer group who want to actually see the real hands that make the product, the dirty studios, the waste, but the designs and everything that goes into it, because that's true authenticity and transparency. So in conclusion, I believe we need to educate. We ourselves need to be educated, consumers need to be educated, and we need to really educate the whole value chain. And we need to move past this idea of a supply chain of one network supplying to the next and think about it in its totality of how do we create value and impact across the whole chain. We do need to innovate, but we need to understand the role of technology as a tool, not to be overwhelmed with its power of thinking that we're going to transform, and that goes the same with AI. I can tell you about all the AI potential in these solutions, but we still have to remember that it's a tool that has to be used for our objective and the objective of this product. Collaboration is key. I cannot say this enough. Collaboration across sectors, across partners, across industries, across countries, and it's only through this collaboration and dialogue that we're actually going to really be able to work towards solutions. So we really have to break free of this silo mentality that engineers don't talk to textile students or textile researchers don't talk to farmers. We have to talk together and we have to work together and enable. We really have to support projects that are really challenging the future and providing solutions through finance, through policy, and through infrastructural support. Perfect. So I want to end on this quote, and this is somewhat of my slogan that I always say, that not all crafts are equal, but all craft communities have an equal right to grow. And this is actually one of our oldest weavers in Sri Lanka. And she's a proof of case that before COVID, she was weaving textiles that was being sold for $2 a meter. And through this level of transparency and that bag that she wove, we were actually able to pay her $100 a meter for the same skill sets. So it's not the skills that's the issue, it's really the system around it that's broken. My LinkedIn, my website, if anyone has questions or projects that they ever wish to discuss, I'll be more than happy to speak to you. On that note, how am I for time? I'm good. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meeder, for that insightful presentation and for sharing with us how emerging tools such as blockchain, digital product passports, and digital identity are reshaping international trade and what these technologies actually mean for producers, social enterprises, and buyers. And with that, we now open the floor for our audience comments, insights, and questions. Please use the microphone located along the aisle. And when asking a question, kindly state your name and the organization you represent or are affiliated with. Okay, so from our audience, yes, Kim? Team, it's team.
Hello. Hello. Yeah, I have one question. Was the cost of accessing the bank services added to the selling price of the product? I find it interesting how you were able to engage them to disclose this type of information. And can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, very good question and good thing that you picked up on it. So at the time, because costs have changed, and if you know anything about blockchain, you also know how much energy it uses as a technology. So costs are actually high. On average, it's about, on any given product, it's about 10 to 50% on top of that product costs. So in this experiment, we realized that you could not produce a low-value product. So our weaver here, we couldn't add blockchain on her $1 textiles a meter because it didn't cover the costs. So we would have to innovate to have her weave $100 a meter, and then it became somewhat fair. Now I believe, well, I know costs have come down, but I'd also say that blockchain may not be the technology we need anymore. AI is emerging really, really fast, and there are solutions with AI that can actually help verify. So maybe some of the initial costs with blockchain aren't going to be there. And at the same time, as a growing trend and as a matter of interest, I see that blockchain is actually moving much more towards the financial sector. So we see banking using blockchain because it makes sense for transactions worth $1 million, because you need that level of transparency of where money is moving from. But whether blockchain makes sense on a basic t-shirt anymore, I would say no. And I would almost say, look for alternative technologies and alternative ways to actually show the level of transparency that you need. Does that answer your question? Or did I miss something? Yeah?
How were you able to engage the banks to participate in the product?
How we're able to engage the
Services of the banks in terms
of the banks. Actually, that's an interesting point, because we thought we would have the biggest challenge with the rural community, the craft makers, and let's say the farmers. The banks were okay because they could understand that this was a proof of concept, this was a test. So in this particular case, we have very good relationships with our banks. So once again, it's not all banks, it was a rural bank that we work with. So the fact that they could understand that this transparency was allowing us to sell a higher value product, and that their support of agreeing to be the third-party verifier would allow for this product to sell at a higher price. However, you remember I said we designed this bag with a Danish designer? So he was very insistent that everybody had to have their information. We had to see the women, we had to see her age. You remember all that? But when we went to him and we said, hey, you too have to be on the blockchain because you're the designer, you know what his response was? Oh, no, 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 I'm protected by the European privacy policy. I don't need to be on the blockchain. So once again, that frustrates us because we want to be fair. And if you're asking us, I say it's tokenized from the global south, if you're asking us for that level of information, you too as a stakeholder have to be in this journey as well. So that's why I think it's so important, even if it's still prototype, experimental phase, to have these case studies and to raise our voices to the global north to say, when we use technology, it has to be fair, it has to be equitable. If you ask of me information, you too have to be part of that journey. So we're at the prefaces of this point right now. So, and I have to be honest, we never thought we would have this problem with the designer. Actually, we thought, as I mentioned, we thought we'd have it more with the farmers and the weavers, because we thought in traditional systems there's a level of privacy. But once we showed them that they could be, part of this bag, there's a huge shift. They got so excited. They were going home and they were showing their family, look at me, I'm here. Somehow I'm important because I'm recognized. And for us, that was such an important feeling. And I'm sure you would have the same with communities that you work with. And like I said, the designer we thought would really be wanting to be a part of it. Actually, we had resistance from him. Answer your question? Awesome.
Okay, thank you for that, sir. Another question we have here from the online registration. In Southeast Asia, where agriculture is largely smallholder based, how can DPPs become a competitive advantage rather than another cost or barrier to market participation?
So I think that's the critical that's the critical point, because right now the DPP serves to the benefit of the European consumer, not necessarily to the farmer or the stakeholder further down the value chain. But knowing that these are the challenges, I think this is where, and DPP, remember, is slowly being introduced in Europe. It's not going to have a hard start to 2030. So actually, I would say right now, it's so important that we lobby the European government for at least the SME micro makers in the world and exporters to Europe to have some level of exemption or some level of support. But let's put DPP on the bigger players like H&M or like IKEA that really need to be held responsible, that they're really producing volume, so they have to take that responsibility. But when you're talking micro SME sector partners that their volume, they're not producing hundreds and thousands of products. So I think that level of allowance needs to be in place. So.
Hello. Thank you very much for the Dr. Meeder for a very insightful presentation. I just wanted to ask like a set of questions because I recently participated in an international student conference in Awaji Island in Japan, and where we worked on the repurposing of the Netherlands Pavilion in Osaka Expo 2025. So what I found interesting in that pavilion is that it was designed from the beginning for its second life, with its materials and components digitally documented to enable their future reuse. So I just wanted to ask that since we're discussing about DPP, could we see this as scaling the same concept from one circular building to products across their entire life cycle? And how feasible would it be to implement a similar system in the Philippines, considering our current digital infrastructure, industries, and waste management system isn't as advanced in EU?
Very good questions. I'm not sure I'm such an expert to fully answer all your questions. I will say that the DPP as of now is only asking three things. Simply, what's gone into the product, so your materiality. So you need to document. So I would say, regardless, all makers, producers thinking of exporting into Europe need to really organize themselves. So you need to be able to show in some level of documentation, If you have cotton, where did it come from? Where's the invoice? Who's the maker? Did it get imported? That. The second is claims. So if you're a fair trade maker and you're wanting to export to Europe, just simply by saying fair trade, you have to prove it. So then it's up to you, you write your rules. So sometimes maybe you're better off not saying that you're fair trade, even though fair trade is going to be your greatest asset. Or say, for example, it's like we have currently with organic in Europe. If you say you're organic, you have to prove that what of it is organic and who verifies that it's going to be organic. So the same thing applies. And three is the decomposition of the post-consumer waste. So what is a consumer supposed to do with the product after they finish using it, and where and who can they return it to? So if it's a natural-based product, and that's why I think all these fantastic local natural fibers are great, because you can literally plant them in the earth and they will break down by itself. So when you're dealing with complicated products that have metal or have different sorts of finishing, all that's going to have to be broken down. So if I were a big brand, it would be about creating a new system of a take back, right? Or it could be a brand creating material and education around repurpose, recycle, reuse. But what happens if I'm a small micro maker? Who in Europe is going to look after me? So this is, like I said, this is also a key problem. I keep on lobbying and trying to raise the voice of the micro SMEs in Europe. So I hope that there will be this level of exemption, or at least let's start with the bigger companies, and maybe one of the solutions like we've developed, the We Are Legacy, could help be for the micro makers, SME sector. Yeah.
Okay, any questions from our audience? We have another one from the Facebook Live. Regarding DPP again. I'd like to ask, given that most of the DPP initiatives are more in tune with artisanal and luxury handmade products, how can we in the future make an international regulatory framework that is equitable to both consumers and producers? The EU Green Deal may be imperfect, but do you have any thoughts on how to improve the present regulatory framework?
Very good questions. And I forgot to answer one of your questions about the Philippines. I think you said Philippine waste. I'll get to that. Yes, that's correct. Green Deal is not perfect, but it's a good step. And that's why I would never speak so badly of it that we shouldn't do it. And I think that's also part of the lessons learned through our experimentation. If you do not start, and even if you got to start somewhere for it to eventuate to become something, right? So DPP is not perfect, absolutely. But I think this is where it's so important to have consensus and voice and be represented, because a lot of the times in these decision-making processes, not all voices are heard. And lobbying the government, making your community heard is so important. There is a movement to collect feedback. Actually, DPP is for everything. So as of this year, I believe it's batteries, textiles, and footwear. And it's a staggered approach. So I think next year it's going to be another set of industries, next year. So eventually by 2030, all product within all sectors should be covered. So what I would do is, if I were the EU right now, I would really reassess the implementation of the three industries, but also really gather feedback for other sectors to really understand if this is achieving its goals. And those Green Deal goals are really set to lower their carbon emission and to be more aligned to green packs. Regarding the question about the Philippines, what could the Philippines do? I agree. I was in Manila over the last week, and I was at a, what do you call this? The small units of councils in barangay, right? I visited one of the top 10 barangays in Manila, and I was really amazed. It's a terrible thing to say, because the barangay is a result of a greater system and a greater economy and society, but this particular barangay had such great initiatives that they were taking the bio waste and they were putting it through, what do you call this, a heat incinerator to produce pulp, to create compost to grow plants. And I was really happy for them, and I was at the same time a little bit sad that these are the communities that are most affected. When flood happens, these are the guys that are going to get hit. When fire happens, communities like them across the world are going to get hit the most. I work with communities in Sri Lanka that when the floods, wiped out half the country, it was the communities that I work with. And it's these same communities that had almost close to zero contribution to the carbon that has really caused this problem. So we also have to fight for them. And this is, I think, the piece about the social justice comes in, that we have to consider that the most vulnerable are the ones that are going to be affected of decisions that they haven't contributed to. So I can't speak on behalf of everything that happens in the Philippines, but I can absolutely say that what I saw in this particular barangay inspired me. I could see that there was a lot of great initiatives that they had come up with. They were trying to give their women employment and create like baskets that were made out of packaging, plastic packaging. But when I pushed them further, they said, "Oh no, we bought the plastic packaging thing from the shop." And I was like, "No, that's not the point. You should really be looking for something and not just taking, plastic and creating more waste." And I said to them instantly, I said, "But I generally believe there's a project here about, urban fiber farming. Like, could we look for a fiber?" And there is one. It's called the snake plant. You know the snake plant? I saw some on your campus. This plant actually has a very long fiber in it. It's a bit toxic when you extract, but this fiber is very similar to the agave fiber, which they use in Mexico. So imagine how many households in this barangay could actually have this snake plant. It doesn't need much propagation. It's easy to maintain. This whole community could start actually producing fiber, and then we could actually process this fiber, and rather than weaving in plastic, they could actually weave in this particular fiber, or alternatively, produce the textiles that I, as a designer in Europe, can feel good that by buying these textiles at a better price, I'm giving not only impact and work and paying fair, but I'm actually helping to reduce waste because we substituted plastic to natural fibers. So on one hand, I'm inspired to see that Filipinos are super smart and super diligent and they're really good on problem solving. On the other hand, we've still got work to do, and there's a lot of gaps that we can do, but start small, I would say. There's really a lot of solutions in your communities around you. You don't need to go to Manila to work with them. I'm sure there's communities around here that you could work with.
Any more questions from our audience? Yes.
First, good day, sir. So my name is Christian Vic Fernandez. I'm also from BSIE. So my question is, given that responsible and sustainable products can sometimes come with, of course, higher prices due to costs of ethical production and traceability, could emphasizing the story and sustainability behind the product unintentionally make responsible consumption a luxury that is accessible mainly to wealthier consumers?
Yes, but it would also have a trickle-down effect. So it would be expensive, but it has a twofold opportunity. The first is, for too long, countries in the global south that produce craft products have been subjected to produce cheap craft products. I've come across a lot of, in the Philippines, you have this sort of product, right? But I know, and like I gave you the example, I know she could actually weave better than that. But their community haven't been given the opportunity. So they're subjected to produce this, let's call it a placemat for IKEA, and maximum only make $1 product, let's say. And typical IKEA would come into any community and place a large order for one season and move out. So I'd say if we could work with these communities and help them to produce a higher value product, because they can, and maybe this product can be sold on the local market, but if we're going to export, because of the cost of carbon and shipping, and we we really do have to charge the right price for the impact that it creates. So, I mean, I think maybe in the beginning, yes, it will be for consumers who could afford to pay more, but I do believe over a period of time, it will have the benefit that it will get cheaper. And at the same time, we could actually give these women better opportunities to make more high value products. Yeah?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, for our last question. Okay, anyone? Now we have here last question from the online. As responsible trade becomes increasingly data-driven, what skills should young professionals develop now to remain competitive in the future global market?
Very good question. I think understanding the full value chain is so important. So if you're engineering students, really understand the impact that you have all the way down to consumers. In everything you do, I think it's so important that you cannot think in silos anymore. So learn sectors, learn different industries. Like I said, I started off in business. I ended up studying fashion. I ended up doing my PhD in business innovation. Life is a constant journey of education and learning and keeping up to date and learning what you could do and take that to your practice, let's say. So.
Okay, so that wraps up our open forum. Let's give a big round of applause to Dr. Meeder.
Thank you.
Okay, for the awarding of the certificate of appreciation and token of gratitude to our esteemed guest speaker. Sir, may we request you to please step forward. May I kindly invite Dr. Nova Ramos, our SEARCA, Dr. Nova Ramos, our Head of the Training for Development Unit under the Education and Collective Learning Department of SEARCA. Okay, so while waiting for Dean Jenny, may I read the citation of the certificate? The Southeast Asian Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture awards the Certificate of Appreciation to Dr. Joseph Meeder for sharing his expertise as speaker during the Agriculture and Development Seminar Series titled From Compliance to Competitive Advantage, Transparency, Digital Product Passports, and the Future of Responsible Trade, held on 17 August 2026 at SEARCA UPLB Campus College, Los Baños, Laguna, Philippines. Signed by Dr. Mercedita A. Sombilia, SEARCA Center Director. Once again, thank you very much, sir. To our dear seminar attendees and guests, on-site and online, we would like to know your insights and key takeaways from this seminar. You may share this through our feedback form by accessing the link or the QR code flashed on the screen. You may take a photo of this slide and fill out the form after the seminar, and the form will remain open until 12 midnight today. To our attendees joining us via SEARCA's Facebook page, thank you very much for participating in our seminar.